Deleted session, June 14, 1972. Now, give us a moment, and we will begin easily enough. As you know, Rupert concentrates his energy and focus. He does not spread it out. This applies to people as well as deep interests. Once he became convinced of the validity of the psychic experience and his abilities, then all playful attitudes dazzled him. He grasped at it tenaciously and added it to the then unchallenged work to which he had, until then, devoted his main attention. The personality is such that it always looks inward. It does not easily adopt what it considers frivolous hobbies or activities that would help divert and release the energies. He constantly worries about his work then, and all it entails. The search for truth in the beginning was carried on within the framework of the church. In a way, he was rewarded for conventional thought, and punished for unconventional thought. His poetry was accepted and praised artistically when the ideas agreed with dogma. The church was a support in the household against his mother. When the poetry was thus criticized, Rupert was afraid the support would be withdrawn. The thoughts were considered extremely dangerous. They were not treated lightly. To some extent, Rupert equates me with a more knowledgeable father-trainer. He therefore feels highly upset if he does not accept all of my views as he understands them, and makes it a point to repeat that rebellion now in a different way. I suggest you close your window and turn on the fan. The Catholic Church, incidentally, as he knew it, while admitting the mystic experience, was highly suspicious of him in that regard. He was recognized as the true intent, emotional and mystical personality, and to some extent, distrusted. The search for truth and the fear of leading people astray are the primary points here. In the past, any intuitive thoughts he felt but could not prove were put into his fiction. This protected him from censure, both from within and without. Give us time. The delivery of the material per se in our sessions now does not basically bother him. He is afraid of making people lose their faith. It was considered the sin of sins. He felt deeply betrayed, particularly by Father Doran, and resolved never to betray others in such a way. He is more upset than he realizes over the opinion of others, experts in the field. That dabbling in psychic phenomena is dangerous for many people. This adds fuel to the fear that he is indeed leading them astray. One letter from someone who wrote saying that the Seth material contributed to a nervous breakdown is a case in point. He takes too much responsibility upon his shoulders. He definitely does not like the religious connotation, and it is only here that problems arise. We are giving what we can to keep the channel open while we see what we can do. What he wants to do is use his abilities to clear the pathways to clear understanding of the nature of the soul, although he would not use the term for so long. He also knows that such channels lead other people away from, specifically the Catholic Church. He wondered if what he can give can make up for what they might lose. Before the material was public, this bothered him, but not to that degree. It worried him when people seemed to turn to the material in the same way that they might turn to a church, merely substituting one set of ideas for another, while never experiencing the concepts themselves. The material you received from him was quite correct. At another level, he feared that his relationship with me was the result of unconscious fraud and trickery, that he had indeed become the false prophet and conned you and everyone else, including himself. This was because he had for one thing watched what he thought of as the two faces of Father Doran, who conned others in his preaching, then showed quite opposing characteristics afterward. The quality of the material itself often kept him from admitting this feeling. The experience at the writers' convention also had an effect there. Plus, the young psychologist remarked later, all of this accepted because of the inferiority feelings of childhood. He was trying to go ahead and not go ahead at the same time. He would not drop the psychic work. He never will. The public aspects of it alone brought up the false prophet. Now, he has been doing penance in his turns. Fasting, I believe it is called. The feelings prevented him from going ahead far enough to allow his psychic experience to answer some of his doubts. Yet, he was too convinced of the validity to drop the work. Some of my material is difficult to accept intuitively and intellectually at one time. You may intuitively grasp a point and intellectually not understand it, or the other way around. But Ruber insists that he intellectually and intuitively understands each point and agrees with it, or it puts him in a position of publicizing ideas when he is not 100% certain of their validity, and he considers this to some degree dishonest. If he is wrong and people follow him, where is he leading them? So, sometimes you see in such periods, he will put off sessions. The three Christ's material particularly affects him that way. For to deny the conventional idea of Christ is to antagonize not merely Catholicism, but basic Christian belief. The same material presented fictionally would not bother him at all. He stands behind the idea, you see. He is afraid of being attacked, or he is afraid of the work being attacked. For that kind of reason, as his poetry was. The difference is this, he was not presenting the poetry as truth for people to follow. Many ideas are being presented in Oversoul 7 to get around that difficulty. He had been taught the dire consequences in church terms of losing your soul, and he was afraid of leading people astray whenever religious areas were approached. He believed enough, however, in his abilities and in his work to continue despite the deep dilemma. The ESP book put him on record. The people that write to him as the result of his books often bothered him deeply, for he thinks that they look to him as you would to a prophet. And if he cannot help them, then he does feel like a false prophet, offering help and practically in a given situation being unable to give it. When Vanna's friend committed suicide some time ago, this affected him deeply, for a session had been held and it did not stop the suicide. His symptoms at that point deepened. He greatly enjoys the psychic and intuitive experience itself, the going ahead, but he becomes worried after that point as to how the ideas will be used and interpreted. You may take your break. These areas have gone largely unexplored. He needs to be convinced and to convince himself that his work is indeed helping others, in that it is leading toward truth and away from distortion. Ready arguments for the other side have been taken for granted by him emotionally. One strong portion of him knows well that Christian theology is far from any entire answer, that Christ was not the Son of the only God. The other portion of Ruber is still affected by those beliefs, and he did not realize it. The emotional beliefs, therefore, could not be reached. A concerted effort should be made to gain the support of the part of him who understands. Your own reasonable arguments then will help. Point them out. Bring up arguments for that side. Part of this has to do also with the fact that his complete support in St. Vincent's Catholic orphanage was carried on by a religious order, Ram noted, for over 2 years. They said, intellectually he changed his views. Intuitively he went ahead. The clash with emotional aspects occurred only when a system of thought seemed formulated that would oppose the early emotional views. The church itself has changed in that time. The feelings must be brought out into the open, so that they can be handled in the light of his current intuitional and intellectual ideas. This is extremely important. You must help him counter them. He is afraid of hurting people by upturning their views. At times, he was told he would come to no good if he continued with independent thinking. Intellectually, he did continue. He is frightened of setting up a new religion, afraid. In one of your own sessions, at least encourage him to free associate, to say freely now what comes to mind regarding his feelings about the three Christs, and also ideas of the Antichrist. Let these freely come, then go to work on them. He is afraid of taking on Christendom and expects some poison pen letters because of the three Christs reference. In quite simple terms, then, he has felt deeply committed and frightened at the same time. The old Pandora's box. Once he opened the door of knowledge, what would come through? I suggest also that on those occasions, how when any frightening feelings begin to arise to call you, to feel free, to free associate with them, and let them rise. Ra said, can I ask a question? They said, you may indeed. Rab asked, how come these early emotional ideas haven't been influenced, at least somewhat modified, by all the intuitive and intellectual activity and the new ideas that have developed and taken place in the last few years? They said, because they were formed at a time before the intellectual and the intuitive abilities developed, and were not a problem until the intellectual and intuitive abilities seemed to come upon a system of thought that was in opposition to the underlying emotional beliefs. Until then, there was no conflict. Keeping the church, he could always return to it. Setting up a new system of thought that he considered in opposition would make this impossible. You do have more to work with than you realize once this is understood, though. For there are also strong emotional drives toward the desire for truth that can be allied with the early released ones, but these must be released and understood first. Now, that is the end of this evening's session. Ralph said, "Good night, Seth." Ralph noted, "I don't think Seth fully answered the question I asked above on the previous page, but I chose not to press the point at this time."